Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 8th OAS meeting. We're very happy to have you here. We were hoping to have Gabby Bratt, who is a Jones Scholarship recipient, give a lecture to us today. And late this afternoon, she had some changes in plans and some things she had to address in her life. And so she canceled. And we're hoping that we'll be able to rebook her at a new time, because we're very interested in seeing her lecture. And we wish her well with the situation that's going on in her family currently. As a result, the man who needs no introduction at all, our president, Jim Kaiser, has agreed to step in, and he's going to give us a talk tonight, a brand new, never seen anywhere in the world talk that he's been working on. And that is called Game Calling Shamans at Verdigris, Coulee in southern Alberta. So Jim, it's all yours. All you'll need to do is share your screen and we're on our way.
Sharing screen and clicking on. How's that, David?
Just make it full screen and we're on our way.
Go to slideshow. Come on. Slideshow, there we go. From current slide. I think that's it.
That's it.
I think we've done it. Okay, so as David said, this was a kind of a last minute thing. Fortunately, I had this talk pretty well put together, and I was able to add some quick things for OAS consumption and get right with it. So here we go. Oh, good God. Okay, there we go. Okay, writing on stone. For those of you who don't know, and some of you may not, writing on stone is the largest concentration of rock art, second largest concentration of rock art on the Northwestern Plains. I've had the privilege of studying at writing on stone starting in 1977. And I've also had the privilege of studying the largest concentration, which is at Bear Gulch, Atherton Canyon. But here's writing on stone. You can see in northern, just north of the Canadian border, here's the state of Montana. You get where the Milk River just loops into Canada slightly, never more than 15 or 20 miles from the border. And right on this part north of the Sweetgrass Hills, you get this stretch of the country from the provincial park, you're writing on stone provincial park over here, and upstream all the way to Coffin Bridge. That is the greater writing on stone area. There's a second small park unit that's been designated here over at Verdigris Coulee since this map was drawn. The two sites we're going to look at tonight, the materials are from DGOW 28 and 29. That DGOW and DGOV, which you can see over to the right, that's the way Canadians mark their sites. Like in America, in the United States, we have the Smithsonian trinomial. So Montana's 24 HL Hill County 101. That's the 101st site in Hill County, Montana. In Canada, because the provinces are so large, they chopped it up into sections of latitude and longitude and then labeled them. So you get DGOW, that'll tell you exactly what little square that site's in, and 28 and 29 are those sites. So writing on stone is a spiritually saturated place. It's really the most incredible landscape you can imagine, with hoodoos. And hoodoos are these balanced rocks, and if you start looking at them out here, here's one, and there's one, and there's one, and there's one, and there's one over there, and there's one here, and there's one there. These hoodoos, but in addition, you have caves. All those little dark spots are caves and nooks and crannies in the hoodoo fields. You get these towering cliffs next to the Milk River And finally, you get the Sweetgrass Hills off in the distance. And those are the Sweetgrass Hills on the horizon. So you're looking straight south here into Montana. And all of those things gave Writing on Stone this aura of supernatural power and potency. The Sweetgrass Hills were the center of the Blackfeet world, where Skoyatkis, blood clot boy, was born, and just incredible stuff. And here at Writing on Stone, all these cliffs and hoodoos essentially produce an environment that's just an amazing environment. And when the wind whistles through there at night, if you're at Writing on Stone in the night, you really understand this, because when the wind blows through there at night, you hear all kinds of stuff. And the Indians, of course, claimed that they could hear the spirits speaking to them. And one of the best examples was a fellow in 1928, a guy named Duncan Bottle. As a child, he was brought there by his parents, and they stayed overnight to leave some gifts for the spirits at Writing on Stone. And during the night, the tent began to shake and the wind whistled, and Duncan Bottle's father said he could understand what the spirits were saying, and it was, "Leave the gifts and go away." So it's a very, very powerful, spiritually powerful place. In addition to that, those things you see there, you get these very interesting formations. This gray hump right here, that actually looks more or less like a Mandan pit house lodge. And the Blackfeet they believed those to be earth lodges of the spirit beings who lived at Writing on Stone. So in fact, in 1924, Bird Rattle came to Writing on Stone with Ronald Wilcombe, and he and Split Ears, Bird Rattle and Split Ears, went to the top of that very butte and laid down some red cloth and some trade beads and all sorts of things, other things, for an offering to the spirits. Well, in fact, when I worked at Writing on Stone, you could, I'm going to try and find my cursor here. There it is. You could wander around down here below that butte and still see at your feet all kinds of seed beads and stuff like that. So the spirituality of Writing on Stone is right there in your face all the time. Okay. Excuse me, the ceremonial art tradition, I defined that in 1977. I was the first person to sort of lay out the idea of what the ceremonial rock art tradition was. And I did that based on V-necked humans, which you see there in that tracing from DGOW 29 in the photograph, and the tracing that is of the same thing, and boat form animals. And boat form animals, that little elk over there with the kind of banana shaped body is called a boat form animal. Well, based primarily on those two things, I defined this ceremonial art tradition. And there's lots more V-neck guys. Only the first one is from Writing on Stone. The rest of them go all the way down into Wyoming and across into South Dakota and into northern Colorado. So plenty of V-neck guys all across the northern plains. Also, likewise, plenty of boat form animals. You've got mountain sheep and elk and an antelope there in the lower center. And those come from Montana, South Dakota, and Wyoming. So you have plenty more of these things all across the plains. What you don't have is any of those, these feather fans that fellow is standing there holding up. And you can see he's got one in each hand, and he's actually got a headdress that's made in the same way. So when I first found these, I assumed, because in 1977, there were a few dozen sites in Montana known and written about, and we knew there were hundreds and hundreds more. I just assumed that we'd find lots more of these feather fans and this kind of relationship between these two guys and this animal, and we'd better understand it. Well, not the case until my recent research. The Verdigris Coulee area is about 12 kilometers, you saw from the map, about 12 kilometers upstream from Writing on Stone. At Verdigris Coulee, the two sites, DGOW 28 and 29, and they're in fact just over this rim rock here, 28 and 29 right there on this side of the river, has about 24 human figures and about the same number of animal, both form animal figures, and a single freestanding feather fan, like the ones you see in the guy's hands there on the left, and what I identify and interpret as a drive lane fence. These things, now there's 150 other images at the site, but they're different. They're horses and riders and guys shooting guns at one another and sort of typical biographic rock art from writing on stone. But these are different, these boat form animals and V-neck humans. These are different enough that they stand out. You can separate them out as a corpus of data that you can look at. They're found in 14 structured compositions that indicate, if you understand what the compositions are trying to tell you, the narrative that's embedded within them, they indicate that these images were done by shamans who were engaged in calling game, bringing game in close to communal kill sites. And so we're going to explore that a little bit with this. There's the first composition that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about it in detail later, but there's a tracing of that. So you can see you got the guy there on the left, and there's a freestanding feather fan just to his left. To the right of him is a woman holding a feather fan up. She's got a feather fan for a headdress. And just below them is this wonderful big mountain sheep here, bighorn sheep. And you can see the bighorn sheep's horns in this picture. So you see that's the tracing made of that thing. Well, here's another pair of compositions, and you've seen the one on the left. It was on the lead slide, but the one on the right is the one that was the title slide. So here you have two more of these things where on the right side, the guy's just holding his hands up, but on the left side, the guy's holding up those feather fans, and the animal is actually approaching right to the person. Well, there's more compositions. In this one, it's a large panel, and there's 4 compositions here. The thing I want you to notice is the 2 thin gray lines that go vertically across there. Those are labeled saw cut. What happened is this site was first recorded in 1962 by Selwyn Dewdney, who did some sketches of it. I did a full tracing of it in 1977, but between the time Dewdney was there and the time I was there, the section on the far right, scene number 4, had been stolen, had been sawed off the wall, pried off with a crowbar, and taken away. Fortunately, we have a photograph of it, or parts of it, because the person who either stole it or found it when it had been stolen allowed a person to take a photograph of it. But you can see you've got 4 different scenes across there, and they're pretty much all the same. This guy over here, there's a number of humans along with our primary figure with the feather fans, an antelope, and 3 skunks. And the skunks are sort of odd, but they're there, obviously. The second scene shows this guy with big hands, hands up, and an animal that we can't identify here. It may be an antelope, it may be something else. Here's the big guy in the center with 3 antelope to his right. And finally, here's the guy on the far right with his hands up and an elk. Then, in addition to these hunting scenes, or these scenes where the humans are interacting with the animals, you have animals interacting with themselves. And here's an image showing a bighorn ram and a bighorn ewe in a mating behavior, in a rutting behavior. You can see this, all kinds of videos of this on YouTube nowadays. And the ram follows the ewe around until she's ready to breed, and then the deed is done. But here you see it, exactly that scene captured in the rock art. And one has to assume that that is dealing with fertility and procreation of more game animals for the people who are drawing these things. There's even more compositions. Here's one. Here's a guy and a bird. So basically you see the bird on the right there, and the guy who is actually holding up and touching its beak with his magic wand of some sort. Here's another one where you have a sex scene between these two humans, the male upper left and the female. There's a little shield-bearing warrior down below, and we don't know if that's related or not, but directly above the pair of sexually coupled people is this boat form animal. And we don't know what species of animal it is. The antlers are way out of proportion. It could be pretty much anything. We can't really understand that, but it's clear that sex had something to do with these animals that are out there. And finally, you have these four people, a pair on the left and two singles, center and right, that are portrayed standing there holding up their magic wand. The two people on the left hold theirs together. We call those feather fans because they're clearly not a utilitarian object. These people did not have garden rakes, so that's not what it is. And that kind of symbolism is typically how they would show a group of feathers together. The guy on the far right also has a feather fan, and the guy in the middle has more of a scepter, like King Charles would do in the medieval times in Great Britain. And we don't know what it is, but take a close look at that circly thing on the top, because you'll see something like that again in a little while. So here's the biggest scene of all of these. This is what we think is a scene actually showing the driving of these animals along with fences. You've seen this group before, the two humans there just below the red arrow and the bighorn sheep. And so you have to kind of take a metaphoric step back from this and understand it. You have two sides to this composition. You have the right side and the left side. The right side is to the right of the scale. The left side, the left part is to the left of the scale. The right side, excuse me, the right side is earlier. And we understand that because it's made by a different artist. You can tell the animals are different, humans are different. And the left side uses the two people with the feather fans on the right side as part of their scene. So we know that the left side was drawn afterwards to reuse a part of the right side. The vertical lines, and you can see there's a whole bunch of vertical lines in there, and there's humans scattered in, small humans scattered in among those vertical lines. I interpret those, I think reasonably so, to be drive lane fences. So what we're going to do now is we're going to deconstruct this and then put it back together, okay? So here's how it's composed. There's the vertical lines, and they don't look like much all on their own, but what you need to do is look at their basic shape. Over here on the left, you have essentially two lines of these, okay, two rows. On the right, you have a big V-shaped thing. So you got a line coming here, a line coming here, and a line coming in here. So you've got this kind of V shape on the right and a sort of a corridor on the left. Well, let's plug the humans in there, and suddenly it begins to, you understand why they are where they are. Those humans are at the head of the V, and where the two rows on the left come out. So they're in the center of this whole thing. The other smaller humans, and you can see them here, everything from this simple M shape up here at the top, M shape with a neck, down to more complex, slightly more complex humans here. They all stand right in among those vertical lines, which I said represent the drive lane. Finally, if you put the animals in, suddenly they make sense. The animals are running down between the two rows of fences on the left and running up into the V shape on the right. So basically, that's how you get to that scene. That's how it's put together, and you can begin to understand it. Okay.
Jim, can I ask you what the drive line is?
Yeah, you certainly can. The drive lanes are probably brush piles or small sticks stuck up with something at the top that waves and flutters and causes the animals to move in a certain direction, the way the hunters want them to move.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's summarize what we've got right now in terms of our the evidence at these sites. We have 8 scenes involving humans and animals in a structured relationship. 4 of those show a single human and a single animal. 1, in fact, shows a bird. So 3 with game animals and 1 with a bird. You've got 4 of those scenes, 4 others that show multiple humans involved with animals in the same way that the single humans are involved with animals. Then you've got these 4 humans posed, freestanding, but posed just standing there with these feather fans or the magic wand in the center held up. And finally, you've got 1 scene shows animal behavior. And in fact, there's another scene that shows maybe 2 other scenes that show animal behavior, but they're not nearly as clear as that. So I kind of focused on that one. The animals at the site include pronghorn antelope, bighorn sheep, and unidentifiable quadrupeds. They're about evenly split. Now, those unidentifiable quadrupeds include this guy right here in the photograph. I gotta get my cursor to work. This guy is unidentified because his horns or antlers don't look like anything. We just can't tell what he is. But 3 of those unidentifiable quadrupeds are in fact female animals that are, one we know is a pronghorn antelope, and a couple of others are probably elk or antelope. So then in addition, you've got 2 elk, 1 bird, and the 3 skunks. Okay, so with those, the pronghorn, the bighorn, the elk, the bird, and a female quadruped are in scenes with humans. So pretty much everything of that bunch occurs in scenes with humans. The ones that are freestanding animals that aren't associated with humans include pronghorns, and there's a male on top and a female on the bottom, bighorns, a single skunk, and some unidentifiable animals and these are drawn without human interaction. So we know that the main focus here is to draw these animals interacting with humans, but we've also got a lot of these animals drawn. It was important to go there and just draw animals. It was important to go there and just draw humans holding up these feather fans. It was even more important to go to these sites and draw these little scenes that show the interaction between the humans and the animals. Okay, so we know that these animals and humans are depicted as powerful. And what do we mean by powerful? Supernaturally potent. They have qualities that are supernatural about them. How do we know that? Well, you'll notice if you look at those 3 humans and those 3 animals, that between the whole bunch of them, they show ribs. And here's ribs on this. I gotta find my cursor here. There it is. Here's ribs on this human, ribs on these 3 animals. In addition, you've got heart lines. That's this line that goes from the neck down into the body. There's one. And they're on all 3 of the animals. And they've got kidneys, and that are these 2 dots in the back of the body or in the lower body here. Well, all of those internal organs, even ones that aren't technically real, like the heart line, but all those internal organs are seen to be places of power in Plains iconography, especially Blackfoot iconography. So if you see a teepee painting of a Blackfoot teepee with the antelope teepee, the antelope look pretty much just like this guy in the center. They've got kidneys and ribs and, and the whole thing. Now, genitalia are also viewed as power places, which you can understand. That's the procreative part of both humans and animals. And lo and behold, you've got pretty good genitalia on this human here and several others, and genitals on these 2 critters here. Okay. finally, in addition to all of these, you've got facial features. And you look at the facial features on this guy up here. I'm trying to find my cursor. There we go. This guy's got facial features up here, and this animal's got facial features. And what facial features do, they're not so much power places as they differentiate generic human from important guy, or generic animal from important animal. They give sort of an identity to these beings that are interacting in these scenes. And then you've got these feather fans and two kinds of other wands, one with the bird guy and one with the guy just standing there. And these are obviously ritual implements. Like I said, there's nothing, no utilitarian implement that those could be, but they clearly have a ritual function in these. And what I think is really interesting is you look and they're just held in the hand. One of the fingers is just elongated with the feather fan on it. In addition to all of that, you have headdresses. And these headdresses are worn by most of the primary humans in these scenes. And you've seen enough, you've got kind of familiar with it now. You've seen you got the primary humans, and we're going to talk about these in a minute, but they're the larger ones that have all the internal organs and the genitalia and the facial features. And then you have these secondary humans, they're just little M shapes and little guys standing around. Well, the primary humans, almost all of them have headdresses, and they have these feather fan headdresses, like on numbers 2, 3, and 4. They have this really funky, who knows what, on number 5. They have the little Christmas tree one on number 1. And some few of them just have a simple headdress, like number 6 there. But they have headdresses, and the other people tend not to. Okay, so what's the difference between these, what I call primary and secondary humans? Well, the first thing you'll notice, there's your primary humans, and there's 3 of them. Now, there's one in every one of these scenes, but I just could pick a couple here to show. But they have facial features, they have headdresses, they have internal organs, they have emphasized genitalia. Even the woman there on the upper far right, she's got female genitalia, and they tend to be larger. Okay, they tend to be centrally located and larger, but that's a little subjective. What's not subjective is facial features, headdresses. They hold ritual items in their hands. Then you've got the secondary humans, and there's a dozen of them on there. Well, not quite a dozen, but there's 6 of them on there. And you see they range from the upper right there, which is just kind of an M with a line out of the middle of it, to the one on the bottom left, which is tending toward the primary humans, but it's clearly not quite as elaborate. It's got sort of a heart line and genitalia, but it doesn't have a head or facial features or anything of that sort. It doesn't have any ritual items in its hands. So that's the difference when we talk about primary and secondary humans. Now, you've got here, and Zeke, I'm trying to get rid of this toolbar up here, but it won't go away. Okay, so basically, remember, I found these images. I recorded these images, the ones you've seen so far, in 1977, and that was the first real broad scale, complete inventory of the imagery at Writing on Stone in 1977. Selwyn Dewdney had gone in 1962, and he had sort of hit the high spots, and he recorded probably 100 images. I recorded well over 1,000 images in 1977. So that's the difference. He got about 10%. He got all the cream of the crop, but I got pretty much everything that was available to get at that time. Since that time, they've doubled the number of sites at Writing on Stone and equally doubled the number of images, and other people have recorded them, including Michael Klassen and Jack Brink and Mike Turney and a number of others. But the point here is when I first found those images, and again, remember, I thought I interpreted them at the time as being Vision Quest images, because, where humans get power from animals. And because that's the only comparative thing I had. In the Columbia Plateau, humans and animals show up in kind of those things, but the humans don't have ritual wands, and they don't have faces, and they don't have internal organs, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the closest I could come to an idea of what this was. Well, interestingly, when I found those images at Verdigris Coulee, there was only one other site known on the plains, and it's DGOV 88, which is named Thunderbird Cave, and it's at Riding on Stone Provincial Park. So it's 12 kilometers downstream. That was the only other site that had anything similar. And here's what Thunderbird Cave has you. There's a guy, you can see him. Here's the ritual wand, here, the feather fan. There's ribs and a heart line and genitalia and whatnot. There's a boat form animal. And here's another guy with kidneys up here in his body, genitals, a nice headdress, and ribs, and this sort of magic wand out here in this hand. But what's really notable in Thunderbird Cave is these don't make scenes like they do at Verdigris Coulee. These aren't in these structured relationships. So basically what you get is no compositions, and clearly the animal, and there's actually two animals there, but the other one doesn't have a head. It's pretty sketchy. This one is clearly an animal. You can see he's got big, tall ears or horns of some sort. But look, he's not nearly as elaborate as the animals that are at most of the animals that are at Verdigris Coulee. And there's none of these compositions. Okay, so what about the rest of the Northern Plains? Now you have to take yourself back to 1977. Here I am, green as a gourd, my first great big rock art project. I recorded 58 sites, and that's more sites fully recorded than were fully recorded on all the rest of the Northern Plains at the time. There were probably 24 sites that were reported before that. So they had kind of some records, and some were real sketchy, and some were a little more complete. But what I thought in 1977 was, wow, this is kind of opened Pandora's box. People are going to go out there and start recording more sites because cultural resource management was coming along, and lots of archaeologists out doing stuff. They're going to find lots more sites, and they'll find lots more of these sites with feather fans and compositions and boat form animals. And well, they found the boat form animals, and they found the V-neck guys, but they didn't find any more compositions, or not very many, and they didn't find any more feather fans. So in that following 45 years, and if you think about it, I've been working on the plains during that whole time. Michael Klassen, John and Mavis Greer, Larry Lohendorf, Jack Brink, Linnea Sundstrom. Those people all have multiple publications to their name and have recorded dozens and dozens and dozens of sites. So now we have well over 1,000 sites recorded from Calgary, Alberta to Fort Collins, Colorado. And you'd think we'd have some more of these. Well, in fact, we've got only two sites. And here's the first one. This is Golden Valley 191 on the Musselshell River in Montana. I recognized this a couple of years ago, and the first thing when I saw a picture of it from George Stoll in San Diego, George went on a field trip and he took a picture of it and he sent it to me. And I said, oh my God, that looks just like the stuff up at Verdigris Coulee. Look, there's a guy, hands up, got genitals, got a heart line, got kind of a funky hair gear of some sort. He doesn't have a feather fan, but if you look really carefully at his left hand, the hand you look at as his left hand, it's different than the real hand on his right hand. So it may in fact be a feather fan there in his paw. But look at, he's got a great big elk there right next to him, and a pregnant bighorn sheep. See the one bighorn sheep with the little bighorn sheep inside it. And the great big elk has an arrow or a dart sticking in its back. It's got this great heart line and all those ribs and genitalia. So we have here that same idea of sexual potency from both the female and male angles. We've got the hunting going on. We've got the guy there appearing to be in control of these critters. So there's one. Here's the second one. And in fact, I recorded this site in 1980, and I just it didn't click with me. It didn't connect. But you see, there's 5 of those little boat form animals, and some of them got genitalia. And then there's our guy over there, and you see that label says corner. Well, that's a right angle corner there. So he's on a face that actually looks out across the face that these animals are on. And he had great big hands, and they're all held up like this. And while he's not nearly as complex as the other humans, he's in the same kind of structured relationship to these animals that the ones are at Verdigris Coulee. So basically, what you've got, neither of these is quite as complex as those at Verdigris, as the most complex ones at Verdigris. There's no feather fans, and there's no real headdresses. That funky hairdo on the guy on the top is, maybe that's a headdress. We simply don't know. But these are V-necked humans, and these are boat form animals. And structurally, these two compositions absolutely mimic what's at Verdigris Coulee. So quite frankly, if either of these were carved at Verdigris Coulee, you'd fit them right in with the rest of them. You'd say, yep, that's one of those. So they're there, but there's very, very few of them. We've recorded 10,000 other rock art images, and in all those images, you can find these 2 examples when you've got a dozen of them right at these 2 sites at Verdigris. Okay, so the question is, what does this mean? What are these doing? What are these? Well, again, I originally interpreted these as Vision Quest imagery, but additional analysis, more in-depth analysis that I've done recently clearly points toward these being game calling shamans. Well, what's a game calling shaman? Well, in the 3 culture areas that are associated with writing on stone, the Columbia Plateau, the Great Basin, and the Northern Plains, in all those regions, various tribes had shamans who were specifically skilled in controlling game animals, to bring the game animals into traps and into corrals and into places where they could be dispatched so they could be butchered and eaten. Here's an example from the Columbia Plateau. And let me hang on just a sec. In the Columbia Plateau, and that's where we are here almost. We're on the coast really, but just go over the hills, over the Cascades into the Columbia Basin. This is actually among the Okanagan up on the Washington, British Columbia border. And this is a report from James Tate, and I've summarized it here, but they were at the hunting ground, and the women came to act as drivers. These are people who sort of help herd the animals down along these fences. The women came and acted as drivers. The hunt chief took off his cap, made of the skin of a ewe's head, fancy headdress here, and waved it toward the sheep and prayed to them. A woman with shamanistic powers then approached the sheep and gave a sharp call, which drove the sheep to the men who were waiting at the head of the fences to kill them. So you've got this ethnographic report right there, plain as day, tells exactly what they were doing. Well, in the Great Basin, you had antelope shaman who did exactly the same thing. Almost every band of Shoshonean speakers in the Great Basin had an antelope shaman who could call the antelope into a brush corral, a sagebrush corral, cause them to run around in circles till they exhausted themselves. And then the people just walked in and beat them to death with clubs and had all the antelope that they could eat. Finally, we've got archaeological evidence of a similar situation. We have some late prehistoric period bighorn sheep traps in the Rocky Mountains in northwestern Wyoming. And those structures are wooden corrals that still exist, at least they did before the fire blew through there. And George Frizen, who worked with several of these, I in fact worked with one for my master's degree, but George Frizen, who worked with these in Wyoming, has noted that they have these wooden fences, and the bighorn sheep run up the fences and jump into the trap, which is about as big as a good, a middle-sized bathroom. And the trap is built up, and the animal runs up a ramp and jumps in to the box, and thinking it can jump back out. But the way they're constructed is it can't in fact jump out. And then the hunters who are hiding behind it reach in and club the animal to death with a baseball bat like club. And that's how they did it. Well, in these traps in Wyoming, there's a built-in little structure alongside. Sometimes it's built right into the trap. Other times it's just a little ways from the trap. And Frizen interprets this about the only reason you'd have this structure is if it was a place for the hunt shaman to stay and exercise his control over the bighorns as they come into the trap. So we've got ethnographic reports and we've got archaeological evidence of this behavior. Now, what about the plains? How does the plains fit in here? Well, we all have heard about the bison collars, especially among the Blackfeet, but other tribes too. The Cree had them, and the Assiniboines had them, and the Gros Ventres had them. And these bison collars used what were called iniskim to lure the buffalo herds over the jumps or into the corrals. And this is an iniskim sitting in that lady's hand. These are fossil ammonite segments of ammonite, the shell of a kind of a squid-like thing, and they're segmented. And when these fall apart, those little segments, if you look kind of with a jaundiced eye over there, that little segment looks sort of like a buffalo. And you can see it's small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, but that's what they thought had magical power over the bison. And when a bison caller used that, he could direct a successful buffalo jump hunt. Okay. Now, a number of plains tribes, and here I've listed 8 of them, I think, had antelope shamans. The best known are the Cheyenne and Kiowa antelope shamans, but all the rest of those groups had antelope shamans in their repertoire. And sometimes these shamans used constructed drive lanes, actual fences. And the fences could be made out of sagebrush or sticks piled up, stood up on end, anything to have the appearance of a fence and people standing alongside it so that, excuse me, so that the animals would sort of travel down these funnel-shaped fences into the trap. Now, at some times, the shaman didn't even use fences. He just sent people out in 2 lines, and he called the antelope, or the antelope shaman usually, he called the antelope in between the people, and then the people just kind of formed around the back of them, made a big loop, and got smaller and smaller and smaller till the animals are all trapped running around in among all those people. Well, the antelope shaman used a ritual wand that were called antelope arrows to lure the herd of the pronghorn into the trap. Here's a reconstruction of a Cheyenne antelope arrow based on informants' reports of what they are. And if you'll notice, there's a little circly thing at the top, but there's also ones with the cross piece at the top, and they got feathers tied to them. So just exactly what you're looking at in the rock art, a wand with feathers at the top of it. And during their effort to call the game animals, the shamans were assisted by women. And during special parts of the ceremony, the shaman and 1 or 2 of his helpers, sometimes a woman, jointly held and jointly manipulated the antelope arrows. So essentially, we kind of see, gee, that's just what we've been looking at. Guys holding these together, and they look like what they've got, and the animals are coming up to them, and there's people kind of surrounding them and whatnot. Well, we even have a sketch of one of these antelope drives, one of these antelope hunts, drawn by a fellow named George Bent. And George Bent was a mixed blood Cheyenne who witnessed this antelope drive in 1853 when he was about 9 years old. Now, let's talk about George Bent. What an incredible life this man has. There he is sitting up in the picture in the upper right. Well, Bent was the son of William Bent. He was born in 1843. William Bent, his father, was one of the co-founders of Bent's Fort on the Arkansas River on the Santa Fe Trail. William Bent married Owl Woman, who was the daughter of the Cheyenne chief White Thunder. And they had George as their fourth child, fourth out of five, in 1843. In 1847, George Bent's sister was born and his mother died in childbirth. His father then took two of her sisters as co-wives and they raised the Bent children. But at the age of 10, George Bent was sent back to St. Louis, where his father's family lived, to go to a boarding school, a military-style boarding school. At the age of 18, he joined the Confederate Army, 1861. And remember, Missouri, through the Missouri Compromise, was a slave state. And he joined the Confederate Army. And in 1862, he was captured by the Union and was returned to St. Louis. He was imprisoned for a short period, but then he swore allegiance to the Union and moved back to Colorado. However, when he got to Colorado, the sentiment was anti-Confederate. Colorado wanted to come in as a free state, and there was lots of anti-Confederate sentiment. So he couldn't stay around his father's place without raising the ire of a number of people. So he went to live with his mother's relatives. And thereafter, for the rest of his life, he identified as a Cheyenne and he lived as a Cheyenne. Now, he not only lived as a Cheyenne, he was a Cheyenne in every way. In 1864, he was at the Sand Creek Massacre on the Indian side. He was wounded. He went away and recovered. He came back to his mother's family. He joined the Dog Soldiers, which was the premier Cheyenne military society. And he fought, and he and his brother Charles fought with the Dog Soldiers in all the major battles of the Powder River Campaign against the United States cavalry and the various militias. Now, these are famous battles: the Battle of Platte Bridge, Mud Springs, the Roman Noses fight, and the battle at Bone Pile Creek. He participated in all of those. And interestingly, a fellow named George Hyde, an anthropologist, made contact with him in the early 1900s and got him to draw sketches of the military actions that took place at all those battles from the Indian perspective. And so George Hyde wrote a book called The Life of George Bent. It's incredibly interesting. You look at it through this mixed blood's eyes as to how he was born half white and half Indian and became an Indian and lived his adult life as an Indian. Very incredible thing. But you remember in the last slide, I said we actually had a sketch of one of these antelope drives by George Bent. He also drew the following sketch. You see the Indians in the line, and you see the antelope out here at the left side, and you see the antelope shaman at the end of the V with his two antelope arrows held up in his hands, manipulating them to cause the animals to come in and come into the trap. Well, I really can't imagine any better illustration of that than what we've got right here at Verdigris, Coulee. And we've got Indians around the main player there in both cases, and we've got an antelope and an elk actually coming to approach the shaman holding up his own antelope arrows, feather fans. Okay, well, so let's compare the petroglyphs to what we know from the ethnography. The first thing is, and we've just shown it, the visual similarities between these two, the ethnographic reports and Bent's sketch and the petroglyphs, are astounding. I mean, they're closer than anything you'll get in any other kind of rock art on the plains. We know that game callers were supernaturally powerful, And we know that they're portrayed as just such in rock art, with their kidneys shown and their heart lines and their ribs and their genitals and their faces. We know that these ritual wands, the antelope arrows, the feather fans, were used in both, in the ethnography, and they're used in the rock art. We know that during the game calling in the ethnographic reports, women assisted the shaman. And in fact, one petroglyph at Verdigris, Coulee shows a woman and a man together with feather fans. We know that during parts of the ritual, as reported ethnographically, two people would simultaneously hold one or more of the antelope arrows. One petroglyph shows exactly this. We know that game callers wore these special headdresses. The guy took off his cap made of the skin of a bighorn ewe's head. Petroglyphs emphasized these headdresses. We know that drivers were used to herd the animals into the trap. In the petroglyphs, these are the subordinate humans that occur frequently in many of the scenes. And finally, they constructed drive lane fences and had people standing next to the fences. Sometimes the people themselves were the fences. Well, one petroglyph shows fences with people kind of intermixed with the posts, if you will. So we got the same stuff going on in all of these. Now, but how do we know what's happening to the animals? Well, first thing, the animals in these scenes, many of them are shown in a vertical position, sometimes even with the head down. Both of these, vertical or head down vertical, are standard ways of showing dead animals in plains iconography. When you see an animal painted like that, it's dead. So we've got dead animals drawn in the rock art. But how were they killed? Well, in these antelope drives, and as I reported in the bighorn sheep drives, animals lured into the trap or surround, you couldn't shoot them with arrows because there's a lot of people behind them and on the other side of them. So you're not going to just start flinging arrows in there. It's kind of like a circular firing squad at that point. So what you had to do was get the animals flustered, tired out, and then you ran in and you clubbed them to death with wooden clubs. Well, guess what? There's a 32-ounce Louisville slugger that was found in a wooden club, found in a bighorn sheep trap in Wyoming. That's a prehistoric or historic period carved wooden club that was actually found in one of those bighorn sheep traps in Wyoming. Pretty incredible piece of work, and that's exactly what they reported they used to kill these critters with. Well, look at this scene. We're going back and going to revisit this scene, and look at the three little red lines on there. Those three little red lines don't make any sense in terms of the animal. The animal is fine. You don't have to have the red line in there. What the red lines are clubs being used to kill those animals with. Two of them strike the head, and one of them strikes the neck. So we've essentially got the same thing reported in the ethnography, shown in the rock art. And I want to say thanks to Alberta Parks, Riding on Stone Provincial Park, the Oregon Archaeological Society, which has given me a couple of Loring grants to go up there and study these things, to Susan Ashley, Michael Klassen, and Jack Brink, all of whom helped me record those or have shared photographs and whatnot with me. And there you have it. Got that on time.
Thank you very much, Jim. Can you guys hear me? I can't really
Yep.
tell.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So can I.
We do have a couple of questions from the chat. Let me see if I can figure out how to make this work. One question was, why focus on the kidneys as being a power center versus liver or pancreas, for instance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I honestly wish I knew the answer. Now, think of it this way. That heart line may not actually be the heart, because it's positioned about where the liver's positioned. So the heart line might better be called a liver line, but it just got named the heartline. We know the kidneys were important, and I can't answer why, except they knew. I mean, if you've ever eaten a kidney, you know what its function is. It makes urine because you got to really rinse them good, and they still taste a little bit uric. So I'm sure they knew what kidneys were, but they just saw them as a place of power. And why? But there were others, of course. You know, they had the ribs and the heart line. So I think essentially most of the internal organs are encapsulated with those, and the kidneys are just the ones that stick out because they're not with the rest of them. They're not in the basic part of your chest and upper GI tract. The kidneys are way low down, and that just differentiates them. So they're shown that way. But that's just a guess. I don't know.
Okay, we have another question. Is it possible that the feather fans actually depict the motion of waving hands, similar to the way motion is depicted by multiple layers at places like Lascaux, or the hands of hunters or hunters using animal antlers the way modern hunters use to rattle deer to their ambush spot?
Well, all great ideas, but no, it's not possible for that. And here's why. We don't get motion shown like that in Plains art. Plains iconography simply doesn't show that sort of motion, that sort of movement. Plains iconography shows movement in different ways, but it doesn't show multiple legs and stuff like you get to see in some of the French caves, some of the Paleolithic art. So it's not. Certainly, this represents motion. We know they waved the antelope arrows in certain ways and got the feathers to dance in certain ways, and that's especially good for antelope because antelope are really curious. And the way that early historic hunters used to hunt antelope was get up on a hilltop, hunker down, and wave their hat, and the antelope will walk right up within short range of them, and they could kill them. So antelope are particularly susceptible to the movement of these feather fans. Okay, as to antlers, no, those aren't antlers because antlers don't look like that. Feathers look like that, and in fact, you can see all kinds of things with headdresses and other ways that feathers are shown, and that's how you show feathers. And again, we've got the antelope arrows that have the feathers up at the top, and they kind of wiggle around, and when you move them around, they attract the animals. So it's pretty clear what this is if you understand the iconography.
In that same vein, we have another question, and that is, it is remarkable that the drawings look so similar, almost as though the same artist did them, or that someone started the tradition of those shapes and it became traditional.
Yes, good, great observation. In fact, two of those scenes, and I didn't think I had time to get in depth with it, but two of those scenes I think are drawn by the same guy, because the humans are posed in the same way, the animals look very similar to one another. The other secondary people are around it in the same way, and these things are only about, I don't know, 50 feet apart on two different cliff surfaces. So easily could be that the same guy carved both of them, and that's what sympathetic magic is all about. If you think about it, sympathetic magic isn't something you do once and go away. You do it once, and then you go back and do it again and again and again, and you get other people who are practicing that magic with you to go do it again and again. So yes, that's what happened here. Some one of those early game calling shamans got the idea that this is how you might portray it at a very spiritual place, writing on stone, to help you in your efforts to attract game animals like this, to be a game caller. And at least one guy went there and did it twice. Other guys went and did it. And some of those, if you look, there could be others that are made, multiple images made by the same, a different but the same artist. So yes, to answer your question, what happened was it started, it built on itself, probably wasn't for a long time, probably a couple of generations of these people as they charmed these animals in that area. But again, if you remember, we've got one of these further south in Montana that looks a lot like it, and one that's clear over in South Dakota that looks a lot like it. So we've got this idea, this concept, albeit it's headquartered at Verdigris, Coulee. We've got this same concept existing at a couple of other sites.
We have, excuse me, another question, and that is the rock art looks to be incised rather than pecked. Is that correct? Is the rock sandstone?
That is correct. It is sandstone, and those are incised. There's very few pecked images at Writing on Stone. Of the more than 1,000 images that I recorded, a handful were pecked, maybe as many as 10. So, but it's real easy to incise this sandstone. You can do it with a bone tool. You can scratch into it with a flake of flint, and you can make wonderful pictures, as you can see here on this slide, just by using a bison rib, and you carve into it like that. And it's hard enough that it stays, although it does weather. But yeah, they're incised into medium hard sandstone.
We have another question. What is the status of archaeological survey within the study area? And what is turning up in terms of drive lanes and game processing sites?
Well, excuse me. Sadly, there's not much. Because other than the Milk River Valley in that area, most of the land is in big private wheat ranches. You know, this is just north of Shelby, Montana, and south of Lethbridge, Alberta. So it's the breadbasket of Canada. And there's just wheat ranch after wheat ranch after wheat ranch. What we do know is there's all kinds of bison kills along the Milk River. I wrote my PhD on a series of buffalo jumps on the Milk River about 60 miles downstream. But and there's a couple of buffalo jumps, one of them right in the park. And we know that there are butchering sites and sites where people lived right in the park. But there hadn't been many of them excavated. There's not a lot of excavations in that area. We do know that in the southern Alberta prairies, if you go a little ways away from Writing on Stone, there's the Laidlaw antelope trap, which is perfect antelope trap with a pit dug at the end of some stone drive lanes, and the stone drive lanes are places where you put the sticks in to hold them up. There's another antelope trap that Jack Brink found that's about halfway north, halfway to, well, sort of at the latitude that Calgary is. And these are both sites that are on pieces of plains that haven't been wheat farmed. So basically, I think what you've got, that there were, if you could go back to 100 years, you'd see a lot of these evidence of various antelope traps around there. But now they're restricted to places that haven't been tilled and for generations for big wheat farms. Mountain sheep traps just go over in the Rocky Mountains, right outside of Writing on Stone. I mean, you know, a couple of days walk, and you get all kinds of bighorn sheep. And the bighorn sheep traps start just in Montana, so they used to be in the Canadian Rockies too. And for elk, the interesting thing there is we don't have any elk kill sites on the plains that have been identified and excavated. But we do have these reports in the ethnographies that they drove elk over cliffs and drove them into corrals like they did antelope. So ethnographically, we know they did it. We don't have any archaeological evidence of it. But what we do have on the Missouri River, just down at the confluence of the Milk and Missouri, there was a pile of elk antlers that was taller than a man could reach. So that's up to about 8 or 9 feet. And it was, I forget how they describe it, but the diameter of it, it would have been 8 or 10 feet across. So the pile of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of elk antlers piled up right down at the confluence of the river. So they were killing those animals. We know that. We just don't have the archaeological evidence of an elk kill site yet. So to answer the question in summary, yes, there are all kinds of kill sites, mostly bison, that are known, but in places where the land hasn't been farmed, we get antelope kill sites, and in the mountains, we get these bighorn sheep traps.
We have another question. Could you talk a little bit more about the calling stones? Where are they found? How are they formed again?
Sure. And you never have to ask, could I talk? Of course, I'll talk. I'm a ham. I'll talk. Turn the lights off. These stones are called iniskim by the Blackfeet. What these are, think of a squid with a big, long, pointy shell and a little feelery head and tentacles sticking out one end of it, okay? Well, that shell is segmented, and the segments go from sort of as big as your little finger into your little finger to as big as the palm of your hand, and it depends on the size. And we all know about ammonites. These are baculites, these long guys. The ammonites are curled and circular. Well, in both cases, those shells are segmented. When they fossilize and when they get eroded out of fossil deposits all over the northern plains, from the Rocky Mountains to the Missouri River, anywhere that you get these deposits of the right age, the shells of these critters fall down, just like if you go out on the beach at Garibaldi on the clam beds, there's just a bazillion clam shells. Well, apparently these baculites and ammonites and those things were kind of lived communally in that same kind of deal. And there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And when they erode out of the matrix, the sandstone matrix, and get moved around, eroded around, deposited, redeposited, these segments break apart. They're connected, and if you find the perfect shell, you can count the segments right down it. But once you get it beaten up a little bit by the weather, these segments all fall apart. And as you saw in that picture, they kind of look like a little critter. They got a hump and a lump that's a head, and 2 lumps on the bottom that could be seen as feet. Well, they're just kind of zigzaggy shaped like this, right? And they're shaped about like this, only smaller. They can be this tall to this big. Well, so there's lots of these. You can go to places where these fossils, you just can't walk without stubbing your toe on one of them, kicking them around. And in other places, they get transported by water and whatnot. And in other places, you'll find one of them. Well, the Blackfeet have a really cool story about the tribe. It was wintertime, and they couldn't get any buffalo to kill, and things were going toes up pretty fast. And a woman had a dream, and in that dream, she was out walking, and a little buffalo talked to her and said, "Look, I'm down here. Look at me, I'm down here." And when she looked down, there was this buffalo stone. And he said, "If you take this back and you tell your husband to sing these songs and do these things, the buffalo will come." Now, this was in her dream. So she woke up the next morning, she wanders out, and she finds one of these ammonite fossils, one of these baculite segments of a baculite shell. She takes it to her husband. She tells him, "You sing this song and you do these things and the buffalo will come." He says, "Well, we'll try anything because we're all starving to death." He does that, and a buffalo wanders right through the camp, and they kill it and they eat it. And the next thing they look up, and there's all sorts of buffalo all around them, and they've got plenty. So that's the story of the Iniskim creating this ability to call the buffalo to you.
Does anyone else have any other questions? I think we've run through all the questions. I'd like to thank Jim for stepping in at the last second and really giving a wonderful presentation. Very, very interesting. And I'd like to remind everyone that the hybrid meeting will be April 5th. And our guest will be Dr. Pat Lubinsky, who's going to talk about the Weenus Creek Mammoth Dig in Central Washington. So to find out information about that, the thing to do would be to go to the website and also watch for a invitation to come, just like we've been doing on the Zoom meetings. But we'll have information on the website and also put out on Facebook about how you could either choose to attend or just view the meeting on Zoom. So unless there are any other questions, I think we'll wrap this up.
Did David Wallace have a question?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
He just has his hand raised.
No, I don't have a
I
question.
think that was from earlier.
That's from earlier, yeah.
I don't know how
Have you
you,
taken your hand down?
how you take it down.
Okay, anyone else have a question? All right, we'll see you all next month. Thank you for coming. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, Jim.